it's here. It exists in the palm of my hand. I can't believe it, but I'm actually holding a physical copy of an American release of the latest addition to the Famicom Detective Club series, and I actually bought it with American dollars at a store. Okay, I didn't buy it at a store. I had it directly shipped to my house so I could play it day one. But still, this doesn't. Does this happen? Does this sort of thing happen? I I can't even imagine what it would be like to be a Japanese fan. Wait, having to have waited for over 30 years for a new entry. God damn it! It's less than 30 years. But Nintendo's Erasure is already working on me. This is the fourth Famicom Detective Club game, and I will not shut the hell up about that. Well, I guess all that's left to do now is to play it, review it, play it again, and play it another time, and play it probably a few more times just to make sure it's actually that good. So it is with my pleasure to present to you a review of Emio the Smiling Man Famicom Detective Club. That was recorded on release day. How young and naive I was. That was before everything went wrong. Okay, I'm getting ahead of myself and I'm being way too dramatic. I was being way too dramatic back then too. Why did I wear a tuxedo to walk down and then back up the stairs? What a fucking idiot. Emio carries a much bigger weight on its shoulders than I think most people realize. Adventure games have only held a niche in the modern gaming landscape, despite its massive legacy. Nintendo isn't known for having M-rated games, and the Famicom Detective Club series has been between limbo and hell for decades without a release that isn't doomed in some way. So the question for me is, does Emio possibly surpass such extremely high expectations? Is Emio not just a worthy successor, but also a crowning achievement that will move the series, Nintendo's image, and the industry at large forward? Well, for that last bit, no. In fact, I do want to preface this with something important. Emio isn't really a horror game. From the trailers, the presentation, and the series' own reputation, you'd think I'd come in saying it is legitimately insane that Nintendo made a horror adventure game like this. But they barely did. Of course, I'll elaborate on this later, but I do just want to get that fact out of the way, considering from the very beginning of this game's existence, it's been expected to be a horror game. From that angle, people going into Emio are going to be disappointed. Hell, you'll probably be disappointed by a lot of things. I know I was. But I still think this is a good game, and I definitely enjoyed my experience with it, which is what I'll be talking about in today's video. I'll talk about everything I liked, everything I didn't like, everything else in between, while staying mostly spoiler-free. This will be quite different from my main output, but I mean, come on, I had to make this video. So I hope you enjoy it regardless. Emio the Smiling Man Famicom Detective Club, known in Japan as Famicom Detective Club The Smiling Man, is a command-based adventure game akin to its predecessors from the 80s, starring the same two main leads as the previous games, those being the player-named Protagonist and Ayumi Tachibana. They have been assigned to investigate the murder of middle school student Eisuke Sasaki, who was found with a paper bag on his head, linking him to the local urban legend of Emio the Smiling Man, who is said to kill crying girls and leave them with paper bags on their heads, so that they can have a smile that lasts forever. You'll get most of this from the first chapter of the game, and will of course investigate people and places further through the trusty command interface system. At your disposal, you have a selection of commands you can use to interact with your environment, whether it be looking around the scenery, talking to someone, or checking your notes. Everything you'll ever need is right here, in this little menu. This is the game for the most part. You assess the situation and consider which command option will allow you to progress through the game. if someone were to think that's a bit archaic, well, the system was conceived in the 80s, so on a certain level, I wouldn't blame you for— Psych! Oh yes, I would. Why don't you sit your ass down and let me tell you why this system is actually really good. This system is meant to put you in the mind space of the main character as someone who exists in this world. Someone who is supposed to be a professional detective, someone who has to consider all the facts and be precise with their work. If you're just selecting options at random, you're not going to be a good detective. You're not going to solve the case. That hot police chick isn't going to give you a tit job even if you begged on your hands and knees for it. But if you're paying attention to the game and are thoroughly understanding the text enough to deduce the logic the game goes by, you'll be able to flow right through it, solve the case in no time flat, and burst all over those heavenly big Okay, I need to fucking stop. What is wrong with me? Right, to elaborate a bit further, the text itself is the game design. To comprehend is to conquer. But if the text isn't very helpful, or there are certain leaps in logic, then the game can legitimately feel awkward and archaic. But let me get into that, because there's so many people out there who think that awkward and archaic means selecting commands multiple times, or having to randomly look at someone. Well, these sorts of things are what contributes to the true immersion into these games. Now, I could go on and on about this, but I'm not a fucking teacher, and you probably didn't come here for a fucking adventure game design lesson, so I'll try to keep things brief. Basically, you need to think about what these commands mean in the context of the person acting them out. So if you are talking to someone and you select ask once, then your character will ask them about that thing once. If the character you're talking to responds in a way that leaves room for more information to be told, then you should try to recognize that they only mention certain things for whatever reason. And that's fine, because this works not just to conveniently break up information, it's a bit more like actually talking to someone. So that's why you have to ask them about something again. That's why you need to look at someone to acknowledge that they're acting suspicious. This is just one of the many things I love about Famicom Detective Club's gameplay. There's a true depth to the back and forth between you, the game, and the protagonist caught in between that actually makes for interesting game design. I'm not going to say that the way this system plays out is always perfect. There are times when the logic really isn't that easy to comprehend or doesn't make a lot of sense, but that isn't present in this game at all. Not once did I ever feel like the text wasn't leading me in the right direction. I only truly got stuck once, and for your information, it was this dumb scene in Chapter 3 where you have to look at everything in the scene. Yes, that includes this fucking clothesline that's barely noticeable. But aside from that, the game works very well. In fact, I'd go as far as to say the game works too well. Like, they don't ever want to overwhelm you with options or give that much use to them. Like, of course, these are linear games, but Emio is very linear. Since you're talking to people most of the time, and you can follow the conversations very well, it's almost like you barely have to think when playing this game. And when I say you barely have to think, I mean you the player, not you the protagonist. Because the think command is almost way too useful. Like, even outside of times when it's mandatory for progression, the think command almost feels like a hint button, which is meant to keep you on track no matter what. It's clear that they really wanted to streamline the experience for modern audiences. Hell, they sort of reveal the man behind the curtain when you beat the game and unlock the scene selection mode. Now, I do really like this mode because it makes capturing footage easier, but it also proves that scenes were designed to be isolated sections that are only meant to focus on one or two things. Like, it's only in this scene where you get to have this one conversation with this one character. You don't get to go anywhere else and gather other information and come back to this character. It's only in these scenes where looking is a priority and you just have to look at everything in the scene, like I mentioned earlier. It's only in these scenes where you get to show people things. I know I just said that the game design isn't the text, but there's so much more to it, considering things like the options at play. With Emio, there's so much contributing to how little resistance there is to progression that it just makes me wonder, if the game is designed to only have one scene played at a time, if the game is designed to only use a few commands at a time, and if on top of that you're going to give me a glorified hint system and a highlight feature that gives me all the keywords, I really gotta ask Nintendo, how stupid do you think I am? Oh, that's how stupid. Alright, listen. I'm not trying to say this game is objectively flawed or something stupid like that. I'm not even trying to gatekeep here. I'm just saying, there's a lot more to the older games than a lot of people give them credit for. And I think, if anything, people should try out those games to see what made them so valuable as an experience. And, you know, I'm also not even saying that this game is completely devoid of what I like. Like in Chapter 2, there's that scene where you have to wait for the bus. Yeah, it's kind of stupid, but it's really interesting with how it makes you think about what your options can do and what they can mean. I just wish there was more of that and applied to broader sections of gameplay. This isn't even the only example, but it is a good one, so it's the one I want to highlight. I guess considering these games have different priorities, with Emio being a game that wants to highlight its presentation and writing above anything else, it does do a pretty good job at that. And there is more to Emio's gameplay than just the general gameplay flow. And there's even times when it's utilized well, like the way certain scenes have variations that can play out, depending on the actions you take. Like in Chapter 1, when you're having that conversation with Kamihara, I sort of instinctively went for the tea just to see if there would be an interaction for that, and I was really delighted to see there was.
いただきます。どう？うまい？
Especially since there wasn't one for the missing air.
いろいろ聞きたいことがあるから、後でいただこうかな。
What an asshole. Doing this will cause Kamihara to want to beg the policewoman to make him tea, and it's hilarious. But this scene can straight up just not happen if you never decide to drink the tea. It at least shows great attention to detail, which is something we will be talking about more in a bit. And aside from that, there are other mechanics at play that help enhance the experience. Like the originals, at the end of each chapter, there's a review section where you go over everything you learned from your investigations. In the old games, the protagonist simply just thought of everything themselves. You select review and read whatever he brings up. In this game, however, there are several multiple choice bits where you have to select the right option. It's like a test to see how much you've actually been paying attention. Overall, this is an okay addition. I say that because from a story perspective, while it does make sense for the characters to review their notes and stuff, it does feel kind of patronizing to have to pick the right option and everyone be like, wow, good job! Like I'm 7 years old. What, are you gonna give me a sticker or something too? But if anything, that's just a nitpick. At the end of the day, I do like this change because they find lots of ways to mix up these segments, with multiple fill-in-the-blank style moments. Sometimes the game will ask you to manually type in a response, sometimes you'll have to pull a name from your notebook, sometimes it'll even ask for multiple names, or even a specific keyword outlined in your notes. It makes each review section feel fresh in a way, even though I do have some problems with the manual selection and the keyboard sections. Like in Chapter 2, it took me multiple tries to find an answer the game would accept as wholly correct, despite the fact that most of my responses were more or less the same. And I would have liked if there were a few more like open-ended choices, just to maybe bring up something that you, the player, might think is important. Like Chapter 1 was so amazing because you got quite a few unique interactions depending on who you give an extra comment on. Hell, that section alone didn't feel very complete since half those dialogue results are the same, but this little bit of freedom here just made me think it'd be fun to have more. Oh, and getting back to the notebook, it's seen a massive overhaul in terms of its implementation. This feature sorta originated from Lost Memories in the Snow, you know, the actual third game in the series, Nintendo, which had a family tree menu where you could see how most of the characters in that game were connected to each other. This made its way into the SNES remake of The Girl Who Stands Behind as The Memo, and was kept in the Switch remakes, being a brand new addition to the missing air. Here, it's back in full force. What was once a forgettable little side menu that didn't add too much to the game is now directly integrated into the gameplay in the world. The interface is overhauled to be an actual notebook, and it's a permanent part of the command menu. Which to some might seem like a downgrade since it used to be in the pause menu, meaning you could bring it up in the middle of conversations. But I personally didn't use a notebook during my playthroughs of the past games, so I can't really comment on this difference too much. This is all to say that despite its missteps, I think the gameplay overall is pretty good. This feels like a modern Famicom Detective Club game. And anything I see as a shortcoming, I can at least recognize and understand its implementation. And of course, the game's presentation isn't too far off in terms of quality, with the music especially being a highlight. I've mentioned before I really don't care for the newly arranged soundtracks in the Switch remakes, but I don't know, something about this game's music feels a lot better. I mostly chalk it up to being new songs, but even the remixes are good, and they're used very tastefully. I was surprised when the Utsugi Detective Agency theme didn't actually play until Chapter 3, but the more peaceful song definitely fit when compared to the last few chapters, which all remixed the detective theme. There, the case was fresh on everyone's mind, and the room was full of discussion and speculation from your coworkers. Here, you're all by yourself, and the atmosphere isn't as busy, so it makes more sense to have a more relaxing song. But again, this is just the remixes, the new songs are really good. Since the protagonist and Ayumi have separate gameplay sections, they both have unique investigation themes that play. Ayumi's theme even reminds me a bit of In Front of the School from The Girl Who Stands Behind. It even plays in front of the school, look at that. But the best part is there's actually second versions of both of these songs. Protagonist's second theme feels a lot more laid back compared to the main one. Makes me want to kick back and relax a bit. Ayumi's, however, while being a much slower piece, doesn't feel as relaxing, but it is still nice to listen to. It sounds very, what's the word, melancholic? Yeah, that sounds good. Like memories and ideas are festering up and not all of them are positive. The new characters, Kuze and Kamihara, more or less share a theme when you're talking to them while on the gaze. And I love this theme because it just feels very different from what I'm used to from Famicom Detective Club's music. This character doesn't operate like you, the protagonist, but she's got shit all figured out. Since this song is introduced with Kuze, it really helps set the tone for both her as a character and the game as a whole, really. Aside from that though, a lot of other songs I like are a bit more context sensitive or spoilery, so let's continue with the presentation. In general, I've always loved Famicom Detective Club for its attention to detail. There is so much that went into the later versions of the classics and that make the game worlds feel real and lively. Whether that be running into random people you never need to talk to, or seeing a consistent background detail. The games are able to fully sell you on an environment, despite the genres it's a part of and associated with. Like, you can really get a sense for an exact time and place that you're in. Thankfully, Emio hasn't skipped out on this aspect at all. A lot of the most fun details throughout the game can be seen through utilization of the cell phone. This is made apparent right away in the first and second chapter. You can call the detective agency and decide to leave a dumb message, and at the end of the day, you'll actually get to see everyone's reaction. Later in the game, the protagonist will just add a bunch of restaurants to his contacts just because he thinks they'd be good places to check out later. You can try calling people during one scene, and even if they don't pick up now, they might call you back in a later scene. And of course, as tradition, you can call the numbers from the original games and get unique answers. That reminds me, this game definitely handles references to the past games very well. There's fun callbacks in lots of places, but they're never too intrusive. I think some of these are even dependent on whether or not you have save data from those games, so it makes your own journey through these games feel more personal. It's like I'm actually experiencing these events along with the protagonist. Except I will say that this scene where he says Yoshi reminds him of his grandma's a bit forced. Getting back on track, there is so much in these backgrounds, it's honestly insane. Every person seen going about their day feels like they belong there. Every sign or object feels intentionally placed. And since this is a brand new game, it just feels like there's so much more compared to the past titles. Like, look at this bar scene. Oh my god, this is the kind of shit I've dreamed about seeing. However, I think in some cases, this still feels like a dream, because these environments are a bit too detailed. That probably sounds crazy or stupid or something, but in many scenes I feel like there just wasn't enough to interact with. And at times it really took me out of the experience. Like, if you're gonna have so many details, let me look at them. Let me hear what the protagonist has to say. I think some of these scenes have less interactivity than this damn wall from part 2. This sort of goes along with what I was saying earlier. Unless the scene specifically asks you to look at everything, then they don't even bother giving interactions to certain background objects. I'm not even asking for moments like with the tea I mentioned earlier. I just want something. Oh yeah, there's also a really jarring world inconsistency that just bugs me to no end. In chapter 2, when the protagonist goes to investigate the pump station, it's established that he's very far away from anything else. So he elects to wait for a bus instead of walking or anything like that. But later in the game, you find out it's directly behind the school, which is where Ayumi was during this chapter. Why the hell didn't they establish that Ayumi and the protagonist are basically going to the same place? Why doesn't the protagonist think about that? Why doesn't he go to meet Ayumi after this is all said and done, if the school is literally within walking distance? Wait, is this inconsistency only here so that Ayumi can meet with his okay, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's move on for now. But if I'm being honest, my problems with the scenes extend way beyond the interactivity. There's a much bigger problem at the core of this game, so we should probably talk about that. Remember what I was saying earlier about this game's horror content, or I guess lack thereof? Yeah, a lot of that has to do with the tone and the atmosphere of the game. Because this game rarely ever feels very tense or ominous, or even feels like it's building up to something. Which I think is a bit ridiculous when you consider there's a creepy masked murderer running loose, and the game is marketed like this. If you ask me, Famicom Detective Club's horror elements are some of the best parts of the series, and it's rarely ever because of actual in-game scenes, despite having many bloody corpses. It's all due to the atmosphere and the environments of the games reacting very negatively to just the mere presence of the stories that surround your case. In the first game, the frequent murders invoke the Ayashiro curse to the townspeople, and they all cower in fear and hysterics while talking about it outside the station. In the second game, the story of the girl who stands behind spreads throughout the school. Students and teachers alike fear all they hear. Other rumors and incidents start happening, adding more to the tension. And the school just feels less and less populated as you keep playing. In this game, people already know the rumors about Emio the Smiling Man, but they don't actually know its supposed origin from a string of murders many years ago. Once it actually gets out that there's been a recent victim though, it's all a bunch of fun and games. Shops put up these stupid promotions, kids are running around the streets with bags on their heads. It's ridiculous.
Konnichiwa. 流行ってるみたいだ。
And of course, the art also reflects this. You see this scene? Doesn't it look beautiful? It's from the last damn chapter. Remember what the last game's last chapter looked like? Oh, I'm not gonna show you it, because if you know what it's like, then you know. And if you don't know, go find out for yourself. Play these games. What the hell else are you gonna do with your life? Play better games than Emio? Alright, fine, I'm not gonna stop you. There's some tense and suspenseful moments throughout the game, but there's also even a few dumb fake-outs to accompany them that just feel baffling. Sometimes I completely forget that this game's supposed to be rated M. And also, just putting it out there, the game got a Sarah rating of C, so that M rating means a lot less when, by the standards of the game's home country, its content is on par with Part 2. Which is a masterpiece that's way better paced and more interesting as a light horror experience, and regardless, it's just perfect. Go play it. Without spoiling anything, all the stuff that got this game an M rating happens at the very end. I get that they actually wanted to go for a more lighthearted approach, considering this Ask the Dev interview. But again, this just makes the whole game feel misleading to me, the guy who always knew Famicom Detective Club was capable of having full horror game status. Now for 90% of the game, all the people who dismiss Famicom Detective Club as lesser are going to think I'm a fool. I can't have that. Now before you say, oh, it's like this because it's supposed to be a slow burn. Well, there's a difference between low heat and not letting the gas in the first place, and you don't realize until it's too late. I think in general, the pacing definitely contributes to this problem. You make very small progress with your case throughout each chapter. You keep inching along, while still gathering substantial info, but before you realize it, you're at the end. Again, that's spoilery though, so I won't say too much. But here's the thing. Under this angle, you probably expect me to say, oh, this is stupid, this game's a waste of time. It sucks. But I just don't feel that way, because I still enjoyed this story. Leading up to release, I originally thought the use of the term interactive drama in some of the marketing was just a bit of American influence, as a term more widely utilized in the West. It's at least much more familiar than text-based adventure, and fits better than if they were to call it a visual novel. But I think in hindsight, this label actually does fit. The characters, the writing, and even the voice acting go a long way when it comes to making the game enjoyable and getting me invested in the world. I guess to wrap things up, we can just talk about the characters. Another big part of why I love Famicom Detective Club does come down to our two protagonists, the, unnamed one, and Ayumi. Also, I'm not calling him Nintentaro, that's a stupid name. What I like about the protagonist so much is that for the most part, he is just a regular teenage boy, which oddly makes him stand out among other characters, mostly because this depiction of a regular teenage boy is very accurate. He's not this bumbling nobody that just lets people walk all over him though. He feels like he's up to snuff to actually be a detective. He doesn't kick ass, but he sure does take names. But in many ways he's still young and inexperienced. He doesn't always read situations well, he can be kinda down bad. He's not perfect, but he's entirely understandable. And for the most part, he is this way in Emio. There are some things I don't like about him, but the stuff that I do like about him almost makes up for it. This guy's hilarious, and a lot of that is due in part to Megumi Ogata's voice performance, which is just amazing. She delivers his lines in a realistic, but still very expressive way. Like, this is the protagonist. I couldn't imagine his voice being anyone else. Much like how I'm sure a lot of older fans feel about Ayumi and Yuko Minaguchi. Ayumi is, of course, just very prominent throughout the game, even for some reasons I haven't talked about yet. But oh my god, she is so amazing here. I really get the sense that she's grown so much since the events of The Girl Who Stands Behind. And even, the third game. However, Ayumi hasn't let any of her bad experiences or suffering keep her down. If anything, it's made her seem stronger and more confident. We see some of this in The Missing Heir, when she's helping out the protagonist, and her characterization in that game is probably one of the best things about The Missing Heir. But here, there are moments when she really gets to shine. When she's talking to people who are related to the victims, it feels like her comforting comes from a place of genuine empathy, as someone who has gone through similar experiences. And because of all of this, Ayumi has such a kind and warm presence to her. She's like an angel. But the new characters are great too, of course. Junko Kuze is one you'll be getting to know a lot, and she's very interesting not just as her own character, but also in contrast to you, the protagonist. You're a private detective, she's a cop, you're a bit more relaxed, while she's always ahead of the game. And this sort of contrast is especially apparent considering her partner, Daisuke Kamihara. This guy's almost like an extreme version of you, and ends up being the complete opposite of Kuze. He's a slacker, he's way too goofy, and all around he probably seems like a loser to his peers. And I absolutely love him. He's so damn fun. The more minor characters more so range in terms of quality. Kamada is okay, I guess. I kind of expected more from him, but he doesn't show up enough. Meanwhile, Shoko is a real standout. I mean, come on, she straight up says cops are pieces of shit. Is there anyone I'm forgetting about? Oh. And then there's Fukuyama. If you know something absent from my gameplay talk, it's the fact that I completely glossed over the fact that you can play as Ayumi in this game, which I thought was going to be absolutely amazing. Nintendo's other adventure games have always had a sort of party system where different characters can do different things. Hell, it was even a defining feature in their most recent new adventure game, Buddy Mission Bond. Which, by the way, Nintendo, if you're listening, if you think this was supposed to distract me from the fact you haven't localized Buddy Mission Bond yet, it didn't work. Anyways. So I was hoping that it would fully make its way into this game, considering we now have two active detectives on the case, and a way for them to communicate each other thanks to their new cell phones. However, this split in the investigation does very little for the gameplay. It's solely meant to have another scene at a different place in time, and not much else. And with Ayumi, almost all her scenes are spent talking with Mr. Fukuyama, a teacher at the school the victim went to. But the thing about this guy is the fact he actually knows Ayumi from when they were in middle school. We even get another fun reference, as this directly cements Ayumi's Naginata skills into the official canon. Unfortunately, this is at the cost of a really awkward relationship, which again, is almost exclusively what these Ayumi sections are about. Now, Fukuyama on his own is a pretty fun character. He acts way too energetic and extreme in almost every situation, and it is nice to see Ayumi reconnect with an old friend, even when he acts kinda weird. But I really don't like how this guy is basically here to set up this stupid, nauseating love triangle involving him, the protagonist, and Ayumi. Now personally, I'm not the kind of guy who gets into ships. I don't know, I'm not that great at swimming. And I also don't associate with whatever these things are. But as someone who spent literal months of research and replays combing through every nook and cranny of a fucking 1998 adventure game to be the first to document the perfect ending, I am a firm Shuyumi truther. Now, fortunately, none of this is actually that big of a deal. I mean, Ayumi takes the investigation very seriously, so her relationship with Fukuyama doesn't get past them just being good old friends. You know, nothing major happens. But this game is mostly from the protagonist's point of view, so the game mostly is showing him being worried that there's something going on between these two. And even though he's being kind of a bitch about it, I can completely understand why he'd feel this way, because despite whatever goes on in the dialogue, these scenes between Ayumi and Fukuyama, especially at this fucking coffee shop, are all shot in the third person. It's not like 90% of the protagonist scenes where we're seeing the game through his perspective. The direction of these scenes slightly puts us, the player, as an outsider. So the game is making you think, okay, are they trying to set these two up? Are they trying to make this a thing? And putting aside my personal feelings for just a second, this fucking sucks. Because it feels so tedious to focus on stupid relationship drama in something marketed as an M-rated horror game. And you know, some of my hate for this guy is actually justified, considering the fucking stunt he pulls in Chapter 7. This is probably a spoiler, but I don't care enough to properly warn you. I was about to go talk to someone, but since he runs into a guy who looks extremely suspicious, not just in general, but to you, the player, for reasons I won't spoil. Ayumi tries tracking the guy down, gets fucking jumped, and then I'm like, oh my god, is my girl gonna be okay? And it just ends up being Fukuyama! Leading to another scene at this fucking coffee shop. This is honestly the worst scene in the game. The game is cucking both the protagonist out of a relationship with Ayumi, and you have a suspenseful, interesting story. Alright, here I'll give a proper minor spoiler warning, and this regards both story and gameplay, so I'll actually have multiple segments here, because, I don't know, you might actually want to know about the gameplay part. So yeah, skip to these times. Alright, I'll even give you a countdown. Fucking 3, 2, 1. Of course, when the protagonist and Fukuyama actually do meet up, and he says this.
途中の立花の他の者が視界に入らなくなるんですよ。私の心眼が彼女を映し出すのでしょうか。なのに男子部員が邪魔で。どっちなんだ。
I'm killing you. I'm killing you. I don't care about anything else. I don't give a shit about anything else. My programming is just get that fucking guy right now.
Obviously, the protagonist thinks the same way. The problem is he's a lot more of a bitch about it. Like I said earlier, Fukuyama brings up the idea of them sparring together, and he's like, no, this is the part where you go, yeah, I have a 3rd degree black belt, bitch. If you want my girl, you have to go through me. I don't know, maybe he forgot how to do karate from his amnesia in The Missing Heir. And he does go about asserting himself in a really weird way. Like, he could just mention how the picture he got from Ayumi is a memento from their first kiss together, and how close they got because of it, which, you know, that is great that this at least implies a good ending to the game is canon, so that's cool. But no, he decides to act like, oh, damn, you should have seen that sailor uniform. Who needs that sailor uniform anyway? Have you seen her now? Okay, I guess that is pretty in line with his character though. So anyway, while I do like the idea of the protagonist establishing some dominance, the execution isn't the greatest, especially since the game goes nowhere with this mini rivalry they've now set up. After this, both Fukuyama and the protagonist each get a positive Ayumi interaction. So as the game comes to a close, for all we know, this pointless bullshit is going to continue. But do you know what the worst part of this whole thing is though? The game features a scoring system kind of like the SNES remake of The Girl Who Stands Behind, so all those choices you made during the review sections and throughout the game contribute to a new scoring system here. But instead of being an ambiguous compatibility test, it's contextualized in the world as a fucking report card from Fukuyama. I still can't get over this fucking "you're the student and he's the teacher" line. It makes me want to throw up. Everything about this kinda sucks, because it's obvious the requirements to get a great score here is just select all the correct choices during specific secluded sections. Meaning there's no way it'll even have an ounce of the uniqueness and genuine mind-bending challenge the original personality and compatibility test had. But also, I don't want to do shit in service to this motherfucker's little games. Fuck you, fuck whoever wrote this guy in. Or you know, fuck every writer who thinks they can get away with this bullshit. Okay, I need to calm down. Man, I've been watching too much Running Shine.
If you look at this frame, that's a cuck frame.
Yep.
Ultimately, I do think Fukuyama's presence kind of wastes Ayumi as a character, in both a story and a gameplay sense. Like, Ayumi does have her moments where she shines, but the fact so much of her screen time is shared with this guy who ultimately doesn't even contribute that much, aside of a single one-off detail that just so happens to be the most important thing in the entire fucking game, still drags the game down for me. Now, when it comes to the relationship between the protagonist and Ayumi, I get that from the branding and company perspective that Nintendo has. You wouldn't have two love interests officially getting together. You know, keeping a sort of will they won't they thing going on, to keep fans on their toes. But if this is what they're going to do under that restriction, I don't know, I think that's going to suck. I'm just gonna say it. I hope Fukuyama dies in the next game. Oh yeah, I was trying to review a Famicom Detective Club game. So yeah, not all of the characters are winners, but I generally feel like they are the most important part about the game. Because when those credits roll, and I think back to what happens in those final chapters, especially compared to how seemingly little happens during the rest of the game, the thing I'm thinking most about is whether or not all the time I spent with those characters actually contributed to this ending. The game, for better or worse, puts a lot of weight on its rating, and is going to dictate your enjoyment of the game. When it comes to the characters who actually do show up and contribute to the ending, I'm going to look back at their scenes a lot more fondly, and if they don't really do either of those things, I'm obviously going to think of them less. But then there's all the major twists that shake things up so much, and for those I'm just left thinking, why didn't this get more focus? Why wasn't this an earlier development in the story? Why the hell is this game the way it is? Yeah, I don't think I can hold up any longer. We need to talk about the ending. Skip to this time to avoid spoilers. Anyways, it's so fucking stupid how little presence Emio has during this game. Like, yeah, of course he has a presence. He's the supposed killer of Eisuke. He almost actually got Megumi. He stalks Kuze and makes her get a realistic depiction of a panic attack. They do build up the legend well with the past murders and other stories told, but that doesn't happen during the events of the game. And also, you can completely disregard that Megumi part, since that scene completely loses all of its tension and ends up just being about how she likes Fukuyama, and the game ends up feeling like a shitty Asian soap opera. But don't worry, it's okay that you're not threatened by Emio's presence, because before you can have any actual confrontation with him or anything like that, Kuze just shows up and fucking kills him. And yeah, it's shocking, but thanks for completely deflating any tension there was around Emio. which is to say very little to begin with. This reminds me of one of my least favorite parts of the Missing Heir story, which even though I have mostly turned around on the Missing Heir, I still hate this. This isn't a spoiler review of the Missing Heir though, so I won't get into too much detail, but a similar situation happens where an antagonist is killed before you can confront them. It's actually in all the games, but it's really bad in the Missing Heir because that guy was really important to the plot, and it just seems like a huge missed opportunity to not have him present at all, or make him seem like he's actually as important as he is. But this situation feels so much worse, because at least in that game, he wasn't the true mastermind. Here, Emio is the fucking title character. The entire story revolves around this killer, and yet he stumbled onto his true identity by pure coincidence with very little build-up, and then he's fucking killed! It's a load of shit, if you ask me. And you know, they handle Eisuke just as bad, if not worse, because Emio, at least he's still an actually important character at the end of the day, unlike this fucking kid. Now, his suicide is hinted at pretty well, considering all the things mentioned about his school and relationship troubles, and I guess he is relevant to other characters in the game's themes. So Eisuke's plot relevance and all that stuff doesn't feel like something the writers pulled out of their ass. It's still a load of ass though. Does this really make for a good twist? The fact that you wasted hours of your investigation on a red herring, and it's revealed after the game is fucking done? Oh yeah, also he's the only reason Fukuyama is present in this story to take up 80% of Ayumi's screen time and flushing her story relevance down the drain. So thanks for that. But this ending still isn't completely shit, I swear. After all, the story around Eisuke's case was still pretty interesting. It is sad to know that Eisuke was buckled down with so much stress and so many issues, and ultimately feeling like he had no one to turn to. It is sad that he actually did end up killing himself. Especially since it meant I had to meet this son of a bitch! And of course that's only part of what we are investigating. I personally was a lot more invested in the disappearance of Makoto. I really liked those moments spent reminiscing with Yoshie, and I kind of figured that the story would be centered more around Kuze and Makoto when they revealed the meaning of the eggplant flower featured in the logo. And of course, the Language of Flowers motif contributes to all the best songs in the game. So I'm ultimately okay with the focus, as it still remains interesting. Kuze does a lot of crazy shit, from framing a kid's suicide to be a murder, to personally trying to hunt down a legendary killer, to, you know, becoming a cop in the first place. But you do end up understanding where she's coming from. She saw her brother get kidnapped by this guy. I'm sure anyone would be traumatized by that. I'm sure anyone who felt they made such a grave mistake would do anything in their power to fix it. So to find out that Makoto is alive but only a shell of his former self without his memory is very disheartening. Of course then Kuze says she's gonna kill us because we know too much or whatever, but of course she doesn't. I think despite everything, Junko's character is still handled very well. I'd imagine in the heat of this moment, she could have killed us in a blind fit of rage after all her work seemingly went to nothing, but no, she doesn't think like that. She's not a killer. For reasons we'll touch on later, she does have a lot in common with Minoru. Of course, with a key difference, because while Minoru never could have recovered from his trauma and turned insane because of it, Kuze eventually found someone she could fall back on. Yeah, that's right, we're talking about best character Kamihara. I think what cements him as my favorite character in the game is actually his last scene before this, while you're in his car and telling him about how Kuze could be a potential suspect. At this point, you built up a real friendship with Kamihara. I mean, just the other night, you two hung out at his favorite bar, but the moment you suspect anything ill of his partner, his natural demeanor just completely melts away. Just like how it's been surprising to see Kuze in moments of caring in Chapter 6, or vulnerability in Chapter 9, it's shocking to see Kamihara's behavior turn on a dime.
久世刑事の自作中。君も俺と一緒に先輩の様子を見ただろ。あんなに怯えてる先輩を見てどうしてそんなことが言えるんだ。 あれが演技だとしたら、相当な女優だよ。
It's said before that he cares for Kuze, obviously, but this scene really cements that. In Makoto's absence, Kuze has had someone else that she can rely on, and despite everything, they've been through so much and have developed a true bond. Kamihara wouldn't have tracked Junko through the woods if he just didn't care about her. And if it was anyone else here, things probably wouldn't have ended up as good as they did, since ultimately everything turned out okay. Makoto gets his memory back, Kuze leads the force, and marries Kamihara. Okay, that part is weird. I mean, even though I literally just went on this whole spiel about how much these two care for each other, I did not think that directly translates to them getting married. I don't know, is that just a me thing? After that, the credits roll, the main story's over. And apparently only now we actually get to the meat of the game. Oh, did you think I was done talking about my issues with this game? I mean, if you're watching this, you already know about the actual biggest twist. And if you don't, well, what the fuck are you doing here? You're not supposed to watch this, you fucking idiot! Shoving as much story content as they could into the fucking epilogue, rather than making it into the actual story, is the absolute worst writing decision they made. And it's made worse by the fact that we do get plot points surrounding Minoru during the main game. And they're great! I really loved those 2 chapters with the Todorokis, who actually took in and cared for Minoru. It's really sad looking back knowing they'll never have that closure with the man they wanted to take in as a son. It's even worse when you actually have to come clean about being a detective and everything between you briefly falls apart. This is some of the best content the main game has to offer, and it's basically the only thing we get regarding Minoru before the end of the game. And it makes me wonder why the hell we couldn't get more. Like, come on! I'm sure people would probably point fingers to the developers, since Sakamoto's notorious work in other ends still stains his career. But I think this is corporate Nintendo's fault. The way this post-game is framed makes it so that you don't technically have to play it. Considering Utsugi warns you that his findings were darker than what you've seen, this seems like Nintendo's way of imposing a content restriction on the team and a filter to keep things under wraps. So even though this game explores the heavy subject matter that it does, if it's all an endgame spoiler, then that means people won't be exposed to the content as much because of its nature as a spoiler. So the content can slip under the radar and Nintendo can maintain its family-friendly image. To say this decision held the whole game back would be an understatement. I remember hearing parts of Emio were from an old concept Sakamoto had from back in the day, and I gotta say, I think this game would have been a lot different if it had been released back then. And it probably would have been for the better. Would it have gotten an English release? Oh, of course not. But somewhere, in an alternate universe, I feel like I'd be touting a fan translation of Famicom Detective Club, The Smiling Man, for the SNES or the Game Boy Advance or whatever, as an elusive masterpiece Nintendo would never dare release again. But with all that said, the story of Minoru Suzuki is truly one to behold, even in its current state. Yes, I just criticized the decision to put all of this content here in the end, but the fact this content is here at all is still remarkable. What other Nintendo game would focus on a broken, abusive family falling apart at the seams? What other Nintendo game would have a guy spiral into insanity, leading him to cut his face open and become a serial murderer? What other Nintendo game would express this through a fucking 20-minute, fully animated sequence? Oh my god, have you seen this? The story of Minoru is a legitimate tragedy. I never thought that the game would somehow make me understand the Smiling Man or why he is the way he is. But it does. And it even ties into what we hear about Junko during the base game. Both characters lost siblings through traumatic events. Both are driven to do extreme actions. Both think they can fix their problems on their own. But while Junko was kept sane and ends up happy because of the people who were there for her, Minoru was so far removed from sanity and detached from society that any attempt to gain the love and belonging he once had just couldn't be. I'm just gonna say it, this is Kino. Minoru Famicom Detective Club is a brilliant story unfortunately and sloppily separated from the actual video game, with not even a little bit of gameplay of its own to speak of. And because of that, both parts of the whole suffer. All of this truly highlights how much of a mess Emio actually is. But it's sort of a beautiful mess, and despite everything, I still hope people give this game a fair shot and try to elevate discussion around the series. You can probably tell what I think about the series, judging by all this shit. But let me say it plainly and clearly. I believe Famicom Detective Club is truly special. It's one of Nintendo's most interesting series. Famicom Detective Club is exactly what you would never expect them to make, yet it's designed with as much care and effort as any of their other properties. So I guess it makes sense that Emio, as a modern Nintendo game, doesn't reach the heights that I'd expect out of the series. Without a doubt, Emio has disappointed me. It's not the ultimate Famicom Detective Club, and it'll probably be a very divisive game going forward. But I still like the game. I still think the gameplay offers something severely lacking in the modern video game landscape from major publishers. I still think the soundtrack is wonderful. I still think the art is beautiful, even if the art direction misses. I still think we've gotten some of the best characters in the series from this game. So considering everything that I do and don't like about this game, I should probably give like an actual score. If you ask me again in like 3 weeks, this will probably be a completely different number, but whatever. Emio the Smiling Man Famicom Detective Club is not a perfect game by any means. But that's okay. It's not a bad game either. Under the right circumstances, I would definitely flat out say that this game is good. But above all else, it gives me hope. Famicom Detective Club will no doubt be more popular than ever before, to the point I no longer wonder if the series will continue. I expect the series will continue. And if new games truly come to pass, if the developers are able to bring to life and work through new ideas, if they're able to keep pushing the boundaries of what's possible, challenging the public's idea of what Nintendo can be and what they're capable of, then I believe Famicom Detective Club will not just grow, but it will prosper in a new age and be recognized as the great impactful series it's always been. And while Emio isn't that great, it shows that there is potential. After all, even R&D 1 didn't get everything right on their first try, so who's to say Mages can't bring out a perfect sequel to follow up this game? I won't say it. I will wait patiently for that game to come.